Hello and welcome back. This is another Dead Pixel, and we are continuing uh, our series rewatch on Armitage III, which is a little anime from 1995 96. So we are working on the third episode of the OVA. So we've got the other two um, done, and we're just gonna keep trucking right along. Joe, any thoughts before I jump back into the summary?
No, man. So depending on how you edit this, yeah, not you could edit however you want. You can do it uh Tarantino style. Start with the end first just to make it, make things spicy, really mess up the order of this situation. And just be like, this is Nick's cut of the, poly OVA matrix, right? So
Yeah, I don't think that would help the continuity or anything like that at all. Um, but you never
it's
know.
already edited a little less than stellar, but no. Anyways, yeah, this should be fun, hopefully.
Yeah, one can only hope. All right, so jumping back in. So there is so we start on the third OVA where there's a news report. Some reporters are talking, and there's a news report of a bomb droid showing up in an airport and exploding. And so they do show this, I think, a little bit here, and then and they show it, like, I guess, about to explode, but they don't actually show it exploding. And then the weird thing is that the news anchors actually make a joke about it. Like, one of the news anchors, the guy news anchor, is like, "Well, I hope you don't explode on me," and it's like, this is horrible. Like,
Well, she is a second. She is a robot, and she's like, "Yes, I give you an exclusive," and I'm like, "That's a pretty good zinger back," you know. So it's like,
yeah,
but outside of that, it's just like it makes so this is not in the Polymatrix film, and rightfully so because it's kind of really weird, and they don't flush this out enough to really warrant this whole slight skip of subplot of these bombings going on. Um, it's just like hinted at and barely talked about a couple times, and that's really it. They kind of use this as a catalyst for some other police action, and it's kind of weak. So I can totally
Ye-
see why it muddies the water, it confuses the narrative, and like they streamlined it in the movie. They
yeah.
just removed it, didn't need it. Sure.
I mean, who would it be? Who would be doing it? Like, theoretically, Dan
It's Dan
Claude.
Claude.
Okay.
It's They show him with shades, but it's him, and then
Okay.
he walks through the airport, and then behind him is
Right.
um like, assuming it's a third, not 100% sure. She's dressed somewhat skimpy like Armitage. She has like short hair, and she has like the black face makeup covering her eyes. She kind of resembles uh I can't remember their name in Blade Runner. I think it's like a slight homage to the replicant in that. But anyways, it was, like I said, it's very kind of disjointed, and it's just there to add more threat about the robots and human society, and to give them another thing to be angry about the people. So
Yeah, yeah. It is kind of a distraction for. It's like, we're, Renee is doing. He's got this mission to, like, kill Armitage, but he's also doing these, like, bombing droids, and it's kind of too much. Um, all right, so kind of switching over from that scene, it goes to Armitage and Julian talking in kind of an area that's below the city, I guess. Not quite a sewer, but sort of. Um,
it's a rundown bar. It's like an abandoned bar in an
I,
abandoned
I
neighborhood
guess
kind
so.
of
It
deal.
seems more techie than that, but I guess it is kind of just an abandoned bar. And At this point, we get an info recap about the thirds and them being able to breed. and Julian makes a joke about Armitage having affinity for, or liking Ross, and she kind of punches him, or pushes him away or something. Um, and it's sort of, the scene is sort of left there, but it's a little bit of an allusion to maybe Armitage and Syllabus's relationship, um, maybe something more being there.
Well, I mean, she already kissed him in the previous scene at the end of episode 2.
Yeah,
So that's, where she said, "I'll always be cold." And Julian's by his nature is always to tease Armitage, and Armitage is hot-headed enough to, pretty
react
much
to it.
jump at every everything he throws out there. So he throws the bait and she jumps for it. So it's not that surprising.
Exactly. So then, switching over, Eddie and Chris, the deputy, are in an elevator talking about the state of the case, just sort of what's going on there. So probably a little bit more like info dump type of stuff. And then Syllabus and the lieutenant are talking after Syllabus has been healed with more replacement robot parts. And then this is where the lieutenant says something. He says, "Little by little, you're becoming like the robots you hate so much." So this is so uh, in the movie, there's a little extra scene right before this where Syllabus is in the hospital and shows his right arm and rib area being replaced with like robotic parts, and then Eddie, and then him like kind of limping through the hospital, and Eddie saying something to him as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those added scenes that the movie has. I like it because it does show him, actually being, like, having to recover. The one thing with a 90-minute film like this is they don't really show or explain the span of time, because if you just watch it and you don't really think too much about it, you're like, so this has been like 3 days. He lands and this all just happens, but in reality, it's probably the course of like a month or something is more realistic, or at least a couple more weeks. Depending on how long Armitage is gone for, the actually investigating the case, taking some time, but without throwing it's kind of hard to show the passage of time like this, and without having dates. And when you start throwing dates at people, uh, you're asking. I always feel like you're asking too much of the viewer, because if you're expecting them to have remember, like, anything more than 2 or 3 dates, like, now you're asking them to pull a pen and paper out and do some homework, because, like, oh, wait, when did it start? Let me look back. Like, you can't really do that in a show. So unless if it's based off of holidays or something like that, you're like, oh yeah, it's around Christmas or New Year's. You're like, okay, so I know that between Christmas and New Year's is, like, at least the week. And like, well, if they're doing Valentine's Day or something like that, the whole world knows that. So you're like, okay, it's been a couple months. But without
Yeah,
those key points, it's really hard to show this, how long they had. And that's with the movie as well. It's like they don't have the bond in which, or like the whole team, the police force connects with Ross. And, like, you all know that they know Armitage. They have a good rapport with Armitage. They, on the surface, have to say they are against her because what she is, an unregistered, third robot. And but for the most part, they all acknowledge she's a good cop. So that's kind of like the blue blood. We as a police force are more than being individuals. And to that extent, you're like, yeah, okay, so they will accept Ross, this newcomer, because of that. But usually, you have to earn your stripes, or at least build that rapport with the team, because the rookie or the new guy is always going to get shafted. So it's like it's kind of hard, like, as they later on in this, they'll be like, yeah, you got our support, and all this other stuff. And it's just like, it just felt unearned. It's just, you're the you're the protagonist, so therefore we all love you, kind of. A lot of films suffer for something like that. And I wish, so when it shows him healing, despite the film not having a lot of the other smaller interactions, like even the simple, like, elevator scene you mentioned with Eddie, just people talking, you don't get to when you see it, like, okay, well, Ross is legitimately hurt, because without them saying anything, you're just like, wow, he was literally in the drainage pipe, bleeding out, and now he's just standing fit as a fiddle in front of the lieutenant, who in the previous episodes we've been recording, I keep on calling him Chief, so my bad. But yeah, that's at least they show him legitimately like going under surgery, getting like fixed up and hurting. And yeah, that's it. I just have an appreciation for those subtle touches.
Yeah, yeah. There are quite a few of those things that they that they kind of replaced in the Polymatrix version that kind of help it run together just a little bit better. Next up, the lieutenant says that Dan Claude is under full guard in a government hospital where the police can't get to him. So I guess this is like one of those things where it's like the police are more civilian side and the government and army are on the other side a little bit. So they're not really in the same jurisdiction. Is kind of what he's alluding to there. So uh, so this is one of those things that kind of confused me here, but but so the lieutenant says that the police can't get to Dan Claude, and then he kind of says that he doesn't believe the report that Syllabus made, I guess, about fighting Dan Claude. Um,
Yeah, he says I think it's contradictory report,
oh
and
right,
what
okay,
it means is because what it happens is Dan Claude has been arrested. So the person that you first I'm not, it's not unclear who Dan Claude was in the original airport scene in the opening, but what is clear is, which you're led to believe it is him because I believe he still has the handcuff.
right.
Um, and when he's eventually arrested at the church, where Armitage, fries, tasers him, that is the human Dan Claude.
And so that's the one that's in
Uh,
the hospital, and so he's been in the hospital the
and
whole time.
that's why so he's arrested. Yeah, he's supposed to be in like a kind of a coma or something like that. The then when That's why they're surprised when Dan Claude is finds them in the sewer, and then and then when she punches it, you're like she mentions you're not human because the force of her hit, she obviously hit something metal, so she's figuring he must be a third or something as well. And that's why the entire time of these other murders, the murder of the writer, that was the machine or the robot, Dan Claude. So Dan Claude has a human form, and then he has robots that look like him, or at least the one you're looking at. And when he mentioned, so because Ross mentions, hey, this is what happened in the sewers, uh, it shouldn't be possible because Dan Claude's locked up, and they kind of don't want to open that can of worms of being like, yeah, there's a robot version out there, but like technically, he's like, according to this report, he's probably dead. So let's just forget about it. Didn't happen. It's like that's kind of what the lieutenant's saying. Uh, it is kind of weird, but having seen this enough that I like that's the conclusion I've come to. Whether or not it's right, I don't know, but I believe that's
Yeah,
what I've summed up.
I think that is what they were going for. So, so then Syllabus investigates at the hospital, but he gets stonewalled. And then he sees something strange. He sees Alan, the conception PR, at the hospital. So he's like, "Oh, that's kind of weird." He just kind of sees him from afar, and then switching back over to Julian and Armitage, they're looking at a building where Julian's memories are stored, and he says so. And then the next scene is them breaking in, and it looks like Julian's trying to hack something. And a security robot comes up and confronts them, but Armitage is able to easily destroy it. And then kind of that sort of continues, and Julian is able to.
I always like that interaction because for me it was like it was their version of like an Ed 209 just because it was like full on robot speaking in that robot voice, and then she says something like I forgot, she says like trying to find the like a direction like northwest or something like that, or and he goes like don't know like that. He's like it runs into that robot thing of like that department is unknown pretty much. Like you have to leave the premises, and she just fries it. But yeah, that's like I said, that just felt like the most Ed 209 version of a robot.
Yeah, yeah. It sort of kind of comes out of nowhere in to some degree. Um, it's it's kind of just another. It's like a thing for them to have to confront while they're doing this other thing. But it does. But like the way that it's drawn and the way that it's animated, it looks pretty good. You know, it looks. It's not. Uh, it is not too generic. It's like, oh, that kind of has sort of a weird, threatening shape, and it's a little bit silly, but it does have some style to it, and it kind of makes
I
me,
mean, it has like two bandoliers hanging from its body, like for the bullets,
yeah,
and it even has like a metal part of its head looks like a the old military Japanese military like hat, so
yeah, it does
kind
have
of
that kind of style to it, and it just makes me think that like this OVA expanded out more would have done more things like that and had more little kind
that
of
that
mini bosses, mini enemies.
that interaction is in I'm pretty sure is in Polymatrix. Um, Ross coming to the Ross coming and looking at seeing the PR guy. That
Hmm.
whole scene is cut because anything pretty much most of that stuff
The
with the
everything with Alan
hospital is cut.
is, yeah, it is taken out.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about like if this was expanded out into a longer series,
Oh,
then
I'm
the,
sorry. I thought you meant just the OVA opposed to
no,
the.
no, like I know it's in Polymatrix as well, but just if this was made into something, you know, longer, then you would probably have that thing, maybe a bigger battle with it, or other things similar to it, sort of strewn throughout, maybe.
I mean, Julian has that one liner, which he seems to have a handful of them, but he's just like, Asakusa built a robot that can kick ass and raise kids, so it's just he's
Yeah,
he's pretty much that, he like that is the character you make for Hollywood that has those one liner quotes just coming out.
yeah, he's a little bit of the gosh dang it, the comic relief, not in the biggest sense of the term, but just like a little bit of levity, because he doesn't come in until the
Like,
second episode. So the first whole episode's pretty serious, and then him coming in brings in a little bit of lightness to it.
yeah, but he comes in like latter half of the second episode, and
Yeah,
it's just she's like, yeah, you're a third too. He's like, yeah, but I can't have kids. So
yeah,
um
y-
it's also sort of a kind of a jab at himself because once again he still doesn't know his purpose in life, and being a third that it's like literally the odd man out, like so he can't have kids. He's forever young. He has no real purpose. So he's just more or less helping out just to give himself something to do.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird weird setting for him. But yeah,
Okay. Uh, so Julian hacks into the mainframe to look for Asakura's file. And while they're doing that, they find a picture of Dan Claude with Dr. Asakura. So it's like, okay, that's sort of weird. What's really going on here? And then switching over scenes, Syllabus is called by Chris and given a tip, and I think that that's all the note that I have here. So I'm assuming that it's like, hey, I got something for you, but then the scene cuts, or else I would have written what he said here exactly. Um,
yeah. I'm not. I can't really remember this scene too well. It's just a small bit.
yeah, it's a tiny bit. And then switching back, Julian. So after hacking to the mainframe, he kind of realizes that something is wrong, and he is reprogrammed more or less, and then he attacks Armitage, but he also kind of like warns her before he does so, and then Armitage kicks him away, but Julian attacks again, but this time it seems like he's lost control pretty much completely because his voice is now that of someone else, and he seems like when the first attack that he did on her was sort of kind of like half-assed or really not too much to it, more of just a grab. This next one is a lot more purposeful and stronger.
Dude, when he puts that data, when he first links up to that data part, I hate this part, and he just it grows right into his one part. You're like, oh man, it's just like that is such a gnarly spot to have your access point. Yeah, it's just he's pretty much he's possessed. So someone's remote hacked him essentially.
Yeah, he's been remote hacked, and so it's Armitage is now having to deal with him. Scene switches back to Ross as he breaks into Alan's home and sees him covered in girl robots, and he's plugged into the net. Is the note I have here? So he's basically like just plugged in, like with plugs toward his eyes. So you're assuming that he's in some kind of like fantasy world or something like that.
Yeah, an illegal application is what he says it as, like Ross says it as.
Yeah. So
Um,
that kind of gives a little bit of light as to what how the society views that sort of thing going on. We can't really be sure, but there's like, oh, an illegal application. So something like, so somebody thought about it at least a little bit.
yeah. Once again, this exact scene, like you mentioned before, any scenes with
With
this
Alan.
guy, the press guy is just removed from Polymatrix. So only during this segment, it's only the fight with Julian, Armitage and Julian at this point. So it's kind of it's one of the things I like. Once again, looking at it removed, you're like you don't lose anything from not seeing these extra. It kind of gives you more flavor, but it also doesn't give enough to fully warrant like it's it's kind of weird. You wish it was a more fleshed out. If it was a full one season at least of an anime, 12 episodes, you could have done an amazing job with filling out all the extra details. But because of the OVA length, you're like it's just enough to be like, hey, we have a good idea, but it doesn't quite execute on it, and that's why the film just like, well, we can most definitely do without that and still get the meaning across.
Yeah. The whole Alan thing would add probably like 5 or so minutes, and it would probably just raise more questions than really satisfy answers. So basically, so Alan is plugged into the net as Syllabus sees him, and then Syllabus breaks the connection and begins to interrogate him. And through that, Alan tells Ross that Dan Claude that he's still out there. So there's like even another Dan Claude, or at least the robot one that they thought they got rid of is out there, and that they have to worry about that. Going on, coming back over to Julian and Armitage. Julian's hacker speaks through Julian and says that he wants to kill all the thirds. Armitage shoots Julian, and it breaks the hacker's connection. The hacker is revealed to be a different Dan Claude robot, because it like switches scenes and shows him like just kind of like freaking out. And then there's like a woman there as well. I guess it. I just thought that was sort of odd to put her there, but anyway, somebody that this
He
other.
was multitasking, okay? So he just happened to have a prostitute, and he happened to be multitasking, hacking Julian at the same time. Yeah. So I believe in the film, when he severs connection, it's actually Dan Claude in the hospital, and I believe it shows him suffering like an electrical shock.
Oh,
If
okay.
I'm remembering that scene correctly, which makes more sense because now you're like, okay, so the Dan Claude who's under guard is his protect,
Is
he's
still
still able
controlling
to.
things from his computer coma. Okay, and that kind of shrinks it back down because I don't know if they ever do anything with this particular Dan Claude. Uh,
He gets set on fire. That's literally what
okay.
happens is he after he the jolt, he falls to the ground, ignites on fire because following that Julian happens. So
Right, right. Oh, right. Okay. So yeah. So then, so after the hacker is revealed to be Dan Claude, Julian, um, I guess he does like his own sort of counterattack, and he explodes essentially in front of Armitage's eyes.
Yeah, the best way I can explain it is like they both, Dan Claude and Julian, kind of uh like overspec, and then fry themselves. Their components can't handle it. But the Julian being set ablaze on fire was always a neat scene. I just always thought those, it's like it's a very strong image, I guess, is that for when you're expecting, especially like a kid, quote unquote kid, in the movie. So to take out one of the main leads at this point, it's like the sidekick character, like, yeah, and he's in flames.
Yeah, yeah. He did kind of. I mean, yeah, I guess so. So then going on. So back to Ross talking to Alan, his kind of interrogation sort of comes to a close, more or less. But then the attractive girl robot from before kind of like sneaks up, um, and then she explodes, nearly killing Ross, and I just write here that presumably that Alan is killed in the explosion because he's right there, and Ross is sort of able to go, oh crap, and then like jump out of the way or whatever.
Yeah, probably due to his new prosthesis. He's like, yeah, he's now more human, so,
He,
or more robot than human.
so he's got
So
more power to get away, and then also yeah, like he can those extra parts can take more damage or whatever. And then at that point, after the explosion, Syllabus receives a call from Armitage, and she asks for help. So then switching back or switching over to a new scene, Lieutenant Randolph is meeting with the Judicial Vice Minister Jessup, who wants to know about how the police are handling things, but the lieutenant doesn't really understand what they are getting at. So Jessup is there with another with a like a lady, and Lieutenant Randolph is like, and like, who are you exactly? And she's like, oh, don't worry about me. Think of me just as a fly on the wall. And so it's like, it seemed to me like the government from Earth is sort of trying to probe the situation and figure out how things are going on Mars because of something that's going to happen a little later.
yeah, for sure. And well, you know that the lieutenant kind of, he's a smart person, so he's kind of trying to get it to be said out loud. It's just like uh playing, but also realizes that there's a game being played here, political game. It's one of the reasons why earlier on he kind of hinted at, like, well, there will be a field day if they found if one of the police officers were suspected of being a third. And then when the Armitage is, they put out the APB on our Armitage. And then Ross is like, the sly, like, oh yeah, the lieutenant already knew about it. It's like that sly old dog or whatever. So um you kind of, it's, yeah, when you get, it is a lot of politics, and unfortunately not a lot is spoken, like, or given to us as the viewer. um it is hinted at, there's this big, like, not conspiracy, but there's this big overall thing, and it's just like it does such a poor job of actually executing on that. And this scene is one of the few scenes in the film, so you don't get a lot of the earlier, like, tidbits, but this is one of them that you get, so you really don't have a lot to go off of this whole feminist movement bit of Earth. um but also, when you think about when it was made, they were trying, and especially in Japan culture back in the 90s, mid 90s, uh, women rights were very far and few between. As far as, like, there wasn't, no real presidents or CEOs of companies in real like in the real world for Japan. It wasn't until early 2000s that more women managers of stores and stuff were a thing. But most women's outfits are still, uniforms are still, you women have a skirt at the post office or stuff like that, for or banking, like that's their uniform, is they still have to have a skirt on. And like, now they're like, oh yeah, you can work at the uh cell phone company and you can wear a pantsuit, isn't that great? So they still feel very much um Japan in the the 2000s and 2010s and stuff like that, and now 2020s, like, yeah, you're like America, and like America was in like the late 90s. You're almost there. It's so Japan always like having trying to push that kind of thought, and yeah, it's just weird how like they're trying to color like the real world into this fake Mars, and it's like, but Mars is only feminist in like 21, or the Earth is only like a feminist run society in 21 like 79. So
Mm-hmm.
it's so far out in the future. I'm like, is okay. I feel like once again, I feel like the person who had the story in their brain had this deep lore, and they're like, but they had no way to give it to us. Like, it makes no sense
Yeah.
when you only glean like three lines from it, essentially.
Yeah,
So
I mean, what they're trying to do, it seems to me, is they're trying to be like, it's very different in 2179. Like, Earth is feminist, whereas, probably the Japanese worldview in the 90s was like, oh, like everything is like still very, masculine and masculine run. But there were quite a few inroads that were being made. So if you're kind of paying attention to where things were in like 60s, 70s, 80s, and then where they, from that point, like where they are in the 90s, you could go, oh, okay, so by 2179, nearly 100 years in the future, it will be maybe like a feminist society and sort of
and
things
that's
like
how they
that.
isn't that how all sci-fi portrays the future, is some sort of like, all right, we like in American films, it's like it's the future, we have a black president, it's like, oh wow, it's crazy, it's just like they always
Yeah.
try to do something like that, or the first woman president, or like they always show that as the indicator, this is the future,
This is the
this is
future.
now common, but it's
Yeah.
so strange for you now, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
which is silly, but it's it would be true to a certain extent that like that stuff wouldn't necessarily matter as much because it would have happened by then, and it would be more commonplace. But it's just they always, it's one of the quick flashes, like, yeah, this is different than your society.
Well, I
It's
mean,
just like,
like if they
okay,
do something that's like never happened before, like now, if you were to put in like a black president in like a TV show or whatever that was set just maybe a few years in the future, it wouldn't be like the future. It could be like it would basically just be like the present, essentially, because like, well, that's already happened. And even like a lady president, I feel like is pretty much in that boat as well. Though it's a little bit more that direction, where if you were going to have a future, like a sci-fi future, where a lot of things are clearly different, then you'd be more inclined to use like a lady president or like maybe like an Indian president or something like that.
I
Just
think what
very
was
different.
it the Animatrix that did it, where they had a cloned president? I think that was it. I think it was the Animatrix where it was like they had a whole sub story about a person where they were a great astronaut. I think the first person on Mars. They were like they did all these great things, and they became like they did wonders as president. And then later on, it was revealed that this person was a genetic like clone or something like that, or modified human. Maybe it wasn't the Animatrix, but I can't remember what it was now. But that was one of the things I like. Okay, that's sci-fi and that's different enough, and they're like, all right, that's great, because it's like, or it'd be like the twist of like, well, the person that you thought was running the world is really a cyborg or robot or something,
Mm,
it's like, then it's like, okay, that's truly different, not just, yes, we have the first, like we have our first child savant 12-year-old president,
mm-hmm.
it's just like, it's like, that's uh, anyways, neither here nor there, I guess. Long tangent of saying they didn't give us a lot to work with the whole America, like the politics to this, that they're truly trying to have be like a main cause of a lot of stuff. There's this whole movement that they're talking about and alluding to that they don't give us anything for, and it's really kind of frustrating.
Yeah, the film and the OVA, they don't have time to really go into this, and I kind of feel like it's really too big. Honestly, it's too macro for the scope of this kind of. Even if this was a longer full anime season, because this sort of thing with the vice minister and like this the chancellor or whatever coming from Earth and kind of the like bigger macro politics of it makes it feel very like Gundam Wing. It makes it feel like very like, well, like what are the Russians doing? Well, like, well, like well, what about the Americans? How about the Japanese? Like it seems like no, we are trying to like the main point of this type of show to me is the the individual characters and sort of their wrestling with their humanity and what it means to be human, rather than like the interplanetary politics of whether or not robots can be considered to be humans.
Yeah, and I think the film did it best where like, well, because of the politics stuff, like they cut out a few segments earlier on in the that the OVA has. This is just, but this meeting with the lieutenant, this is there because I think it's the one like little linchpin where they kind of use it as an excuse later on. Um, and so it's like, okay, you kind of have to have it there, but also it's still slightly confusing because it's the first, it's like the first time you actually really come across it in the movie where they're talking about anything. And then they kind of really don't bring it up again until like the very end. And you're like, all right, sure. But like, if most people aren't going to pay attention to that, so therefore it doesn't even matter. It's only when you do a scene by scene, like kind of what we are, that you actually pay attention to that in the movie. So, all right.
So then this scene kind of ends, and then Syllabus and Armitage, it shows them burying Julian, and then Syllabus asks if they can get into Julian's memory backup, and so they head over to where that is, I guess, and Syllabus goes into the net along with Armitage, and right before he like jacks in completely, he says he says the lieutenant was right. Humans don't go where I'm going. Only robots. And then like when he like goes into the net.
Yeah, this whole scene is completely the OVA only. It's not in the film. So it's kind of funny because he does the whole thing of like, didn't Julian say like his memories are backed up? And then they just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah. So once they go into the net, the Ross and Armitage see Julian, and they see that all the other murdered thirds are there in some sort of like ghost form, ghost cybernetic form, and basically it's weird, kind of, because it's sort of like, oh, Julian is in heaven now, and all the other thirds are in heaven now because they're kind of having a good time. It seems like they sort of make it seem like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Julian is only one able to speak because the rest of them don't have their full like they don't have a full download. It's like a partial download. Um,
The alpha
so,
build.
but the idea, yeah. So the idea is, in theory, if you had a robotic shell, you'd be able to reinstall Julian, or at least move him to a high spec hard drive, if you wanted to, and then have them just like run your car or something. I don't know. So yeah, it's this. Like I said, I can see why they took this scene out, but it does have one key important fact for this scene, which you could skirt around like they did in the movie.
And that is that Julian
Oh,
has Julian's backed up somewhere.
no, it's the fact that he gives you the information of Dan Claude.
Oh,
Um,
okay, yeah, I forgot
you know,
about that.
he gives more of that information. That's kind of the whole reason for this scene, other than to show more sci-fi,
Right.
cyberpunk, things, and kind of give Ross a peek into like the world of the thirds, because Armitage is able to literally touch and like move ghost form into with Julian and the rest. Ross is stuck behind like a barrier, like a firewall, so he can see them, and he tries to go forward, and he's literally like, stopped. So there's some sort of barrier that he can't connect with the rest. And oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, and this also gives there's more information about, I'm sorry, the files of Asakusa. I'm sorry, Asakura. I keep on saying Asakusa. Asakura, the creator. And so so Julian has this information, and that's kind of why he was guiding Armitage there to begin with. Um, yeah, it's once again this scene is also slightly odd because you would have you're guessing that they would have had to re-break into the place that Armitage broke into just a little while ago with Julian, you know,
Yeah.
because he's like, this is where my memories are stored. Let's go in.
And then they
Stuff
break in, and
happened.
then they
They backed
bury
out,
him,
and then
and then when they
yeah,
bury him, they like leave the city and go to a cliff face and bury him on the like on the edge of this cliff, and then they're sad, and then Syllabus is like, oh, didn't he have his memories back to him? It's like, you remember, like you mean the place that we just were? Oh yeah. So it's a little bit like, huh, okay.
so but in the movie, it just makes it seem like, don't worry, he's not really dead.
Yeah.
Because the way that scene happens, because they don't go back to visit him. He kind of mentions it, reassures Armitage, and then you're kind of led to believe or think that maybe in the future they'll access him, or they'll be able to reconnect with their old friend,
Yeah.
essentially. Um, so yeah, that's it is a like I said, the scene is just kind of there, the rule of cool, and so is the burial, because it's an RPG and anime staple where when you bury someone and you have it on that peak, like that cliff,
Mm-hmm.
that if you dig too far, the whole cliff is just going to fall into, usually it's like the sea.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it overlooks the entire cityscape. Usually there's like a tree on that end, the hanging
One
cliff too.
one tree, yeah,
Uh,
one like
yeah.
struggling tree, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but like I said, it looks cool. It's there, and then they go back into town. Yeah, they do this whole internet, cyberspace scene, and yeah, then they get the information they need, and they cut scenes. So I didn't know if you had the information on what happens next.
So, from what I do have, it switches over to Eddie and Chris, kind of working on stuff. And Chris discovers that the internal troops are active at Shonora Hospital, where Dan Claude is being held. And he's like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then suddenly a car uh, drives down the road into the soldiers and explodes. And then uh, from whence that car came, but not in the car, but like kind of the direction that it came from, is Ross in a mech suit, and Armitage, and yeah, I have this written wrong here, but it's Ross in a mech suit and Armitage, and they attack the soldiers and kill them, and because they're like
Um,
breaking into the
so
hospital.
yeah, so they go full terrorist on the facility.
Yeah,
Uh, but the thing is, Ross isn't in the mech suit in this scene. Um,
I think he
he
is.
is literally 1000% not. He is dressed. He is in a tank top, like a la John McClane.
Okay,
Um, in this scene, he has a like a grenade launcher, if I remember correctly.
okay.
Armitage has a new getup, a new full like leotard, essentially.
He's not.
Yeah, but
Well, I mean, like I have to look again. I guess I later. Yeah, he has a mech suit. I feel like I mean, I was writing this as I was watching it, and he's
a wife beater, and a grenade launcher. I promise you.
there's not any
He
more
that is
than
this.
that.
No,
Okay.
they're literally showing his new prosthetic gun. Like his new arm, and he's just blowing them away.
Maybe
Uh,
that's what I had in my mind is the prosthetic gun or whatever. As a mech suit, maybe I
Oh no,
was
it's
viewing
no,
it
no, his gun
incorrectly.
as in his bicep, because it's him in the tank top running with a just a gun. I'm like, he doesn't have any body armor on. That was like, it's wild for this scene. He somehow gets a grenade launcher, uh, and he gets grenades. He gets explosives. But I don't know, like, this scene is so jarring. It happens in the movie too. It's the same exact way. Uh, but yeah, they go from cops to terrorists in a drop of the hat, and instead of infiltrating quietly, they go in loud as hell, and barely armed. Like, it's like they have they have he has his grenade launcher, but other than that, he doesn't. You think he'd at least have a bulletproof vest or something, but nothing.
Okay, so they attack the hospital, blow up the soldiers that are there, um, and then they continue breaking into the hospital, and find the real human Renee Dan Claude plugged into some into some machines. that they pull him out, and they're starting to like kind of question him a bit, and they're attacked by a different deranged robot, Dan Claude, who is in a mech suit, who seems to have battle damage from prior, and they run. But this new Dan Claude robot chases after them. So they're carrying the human Dan Claude while this other Dan Claude is like trying to get them. And the human,
It's the sewer model. It's the Dan Claude from the sewers,
right?
I believe. At
It,
least that's the way I felt it was because
yeah,
of
because
how
he,
messed
well,
up
I
it
mean,
was.
from the OVA, he like survives, um, and uh, and and so we assume, well, we can assume it's him again because the other one that we do know about in the OVA got exploded. So they're running, and the human Dan Claude says that the robot Dan Claude chasing them is Armitage's brother, but he says it in kind of a goading way in order to as far as I could tell, to cast doubt on her being a third, and basically saying that she's not a third, that she's actually a second, and therefore, like, not really, because like the seconds are clearly, robots. They're not really sentient at all, whereas the thirds are more sentient, more human.
So I'm not 100% sure on that because this is where it gets really muddled too because he says you have more something along the lines of you have more in common or like with that than you do with the thirds. But they constantly referred Dan Claude's referring to her multiple times as a failed third, or like the failure. They refer to her as that multiple times. So it's just like they kind of in the beginning I always accepted it as like she is a step up or a step adjacent from a third. Uh and it's like, a different model, a prototype model, something along that nature from a third. So it's, maybe not the one of the very first or something like that, is what I gathered. But yeah, they don't really explain much about it, and it's one of those things that later on the meaning of a third kind of switches a little bit too, or the creation of why. So it's kind of muddied. I wish they did a better job explaining it because it seems like there's a lot of little red herrings here and there thrown about to just confuse you, the audience, as well as Armitage.
Yeah,
What is your meaning of your life and all that stuff.
it seems like it's goading. It seems like they know that Armitage like is pretty sure she's a third, and kind of wants to, like, is already kind of wrestling with her humanity. And so by them saying that she's not a third, that she's actually a second, that they're kind of robbing her of like any like level of humanity that she might think she has.
Okay. She's that's the thing is I don't think I never felt that they're suggesting she is a second. She knows she's a third. The reason why she has more inclined with Dan Claude is revealed later on. And so without jumping ahead or slightly spoiling the next episode, I can't say it right now. But there's a significant reason why her and Dan Claude are more closely together than say all the other thirds that have been murdered so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like the couple scenes that this sort of comes up. It, this just seems to me like they are trying to attack her in a like psychological way, but it's not like 100% clear, and it's not really all that important either, because it's clearly Dan Claude just kind of being a d bag at this time.
Yeah, and also like the third Dan Claude coming at them in this giant mech is just crazy because like where did he get this upgrade from? Because obviously he's battle damaged, but he got this massive suit upgrade that takes up the entire hallway. Um, and it's kind of it's a neat character like monster monster enemy design.
Hmm.
But at the same time it's just like them not getting where do you get a grenade launcher? It's just like, it's I kind of wish they showed a little bit of prep work, or just a simple scene of like transition, just a transitional scene. uh,
Yeah,
because it's
something.
all right, yeah, but no, yeah, they run away from they end up carrying the human Dan Claude as they are escaping and trying to figure out what's going on. And then at one point, like Armitage decides to do a showdown, and that's that scene I always found kind of funny because Ross is like something along the lines of like I know that look or something like that. That's what it's like when you're about to do something stupid
Okay.
because that's
Um,
what she decides to fight the fight the machine.
so at this point, Dan Claude, Dan Claude, tells them that Dr. Asakura is tucked safely away in a dome on Danich Hill. And I'm like, okay, I guess just sort of reveal, just kind of give up your hand there, buddy. And at this point, Armitage kind of runs back into robot Dan Claude and blows herself up. And then that is the end of the episode. And so you don't really know what happens from that point.
Yeah, once again, showing the weird power dynamics. Like she has really like huge ebbs and flows. Sometimes she's like pretty weak, and other times she's just crazy strong. And so it's just like there's a little inconsistency there that kind of throws you off.
Okay, so that's going to end it for episode 3 of the OVA. But we're going to go ahead and continue on and jump into straight into episode 4 because I feel like a lot of this. I mean, actually, episode 4 has the fewest notes from me because a lot of it is just action, you know. But yeah, so we'll just continue right along. So Armitage has kind of just blown herself up, or so we thought. Well, as episode 4 begins, it shows that Armitage is not destroyed, but she is badly damaged. Dan Claude, on the other hand, is barely alive and tries to, like, he's like kind of blown apart, and he kind of tries to relate to her in this weird way, talking about like the joy of killing. And this is another point where he's like, "See, you're like me. We just like to kill." So sort of another psychological attack. And after he says that, it's actually pretty cool because he's kind of dangling from the ceiling, and his head is still talking, but it's dangling upside down and just hanging on by like threads of synthetic skin and a little bit of some kind of a spinal cord, so you can see like the mechanical parts and stuff like that. And it's at that point that Syllabus comes up, and then Armitage finishes him off and just blows him away.
So yeah, but also to mention that the original the human Dan Claude talks to her for a little bit too before dying as well because he was crushed by the rubble and
Okay,
like
yeah, there's
impaled.
that one, and then there's the other one. Yeah.
Yeah. And so yeah, Armitage just takes the shrapnel or the rebarb that was in her shoulder and just throws it at him. Um, and I don't know if we mentioned the last episode, but the technically episode 3 is Heartcore,
Mm-hmm.
and this one then the title card comes in saying a bit of love.
Bit of love. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that's like a play on words of like a bit, as in like the smallest or next to the smallest type of digital information, I guess.
Yeah, bit byte or something, like that kind
Well,
of.
like bit,
At
like
least that's
bytes are smaller than bits, but so many thousand what bytes make a bit, and that's digital kind of humor, I guess. I don't know.
yeah, I think it's someone trying to be clever. Kind of like the last episode being hardcore, and like most people would think hardcore. So
Mm.
it's episode 2 was Flesh and Stone, and Electro Blood was episode 1. So it's I don't know. It's once again these don't exist in the film. There's no chapter monikers like this. So it's
Yeah.
just yeah, it's their own flavor text. But anyways, yeah. So episode 4, Bit of Love.
Yeah. So at this point, Syllabus comes up and takes Armitage away. Scene changes. They're back in the city, and Syllabus meets with Eddie, who tells him about. He's clearly done some research, and he tells him about where he can look for Danich Hill. And I think this is the point where Eddie says, "Don't get your partner killed again," or that might have been earlier, but
That was the very first time you see him talking to him when after the boxing um so
I feel like
what
he
he
says
says in
something
this
here
part is
though too.
he says something humorous and or whatever, which was like, um, he's like, "Next time, let me choose the location." It's like, if you
Okay.
don't want somewhere crowded, we can choose a nice little quiet cafe. Something that he goes, "Yeah, I bet this is kind of like the worst spot." He goes, "For you, um, because essentially it's a cemetery with a bunch of dead robots all everywhere."
Right.
Uh,
So
but
so
yeah, Eddie still. This shows that Eddie's a good guy, and he's willing to like help them out, even though at this point they've been labeled as terrorists. And there's the whole the police force and everyone else is now technically after them. So
yeah, so they're basically on the run, and so from there, Syllabus sets off to investigate, and then Ross and Armitage go to. It kind of goes back to them, and then shows them kind of looking around, and they finally find. So they're kind of out in like. So they're not in the city anymore. They're sort of out in this, I guess, the wasteland of Mars. It's like kind of like there's like a road, but there's like a lot of cliff faces and stuff like that, and very canyony type of setting. And they find this facility with the word conception on the front, so it seems to be something like they seem to be like on the right track. They go inside and they meet a couple of strange robots. One of them, I think the first one that they meet is like it's like a giant, so it looks like he's probably like 15 feet tall or something like that, humanoid, but kind of looks like a tree a little bit, or like tree roots more or less from like the top down.
yeah, so it's like a giant wide version of Groot,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's very plain face, almost no facial features. It might as well just be like lines etched into bark, and it just they literally this thing sneaks up on them essentially because it has a watering cannon. It literally waters Armitage,
Mm,
and then they both freak. Like she's surprised, and then Ross kind of jumps in ready to like fight it. And she's like, "Hold on, I feel like it's kind of like me but different." So she has like a kinship with it.
right. And so they kind of are like, well, that's sort of weird, but then they kind of go on. And then let's see, I lost my place here. So then they come across a another robot that looks like Dan Claude, but but it looks more like the human version. I got to be honest, and doesn't look crazed or like with like a different hairstyle or anything. It's maybe like the most like maybe like the most subdued version of Dan Claude that we've seen, and it starts to talk to them. I think uh, does Armitage pull a gun on him? Um,
Uh, yeah, so it's funny because the Armitage does pull the gun, and I think at that point, that would like as he asks, like, "You got an appointment?" And then he goes, "Yeah." I say, "I suppose you wouldn't," and then lets them like follow me, kind of deal.
so he's sort of got like a tongue in cheek sort of attitude, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, yeah, follow me. And so they kind of calm down. They go, okay, this is not our Dan Claude. This is like something different. And he takes them over and introduces them to Dr. Asakura. Um, Armitage kind of immediately sort of reaches out and starts to have an affinity for him. She calls him Papa. He doesn't really respond to that at all. Asakura kind of looks at her like an object and says that she's inferior and speaks to of her in the third person. Then he shows them sort of, and this is sort of where it's like this is guy's kind of weird. He shows them the newest type of android, a robot, and says that there's no reason to copy humans anymore. And he calls these new robots, he calls them alives, in all caps. And he says that, sorry, he says the new androids can make Mars livable for humans and robots alike. Um, and then I'll kind of leave it there for the next
I
point.
think they say phobians as well. Um,
Yeah.
and so he has a new name for him. Maybe I'm jumping the gun just a little bit, but he mistakens during this whole scene. He thinks Ross is from Conception, like the company.
Oh, he kind of
That
does.
he
Yeah.
kind of keeps him that way, and so that's why he looks at Armitage as being like a failed third, essentially, because thirds are imperfect, and that's kind of why they're. It kind of makes sense later. It's like, okay, well, if the in his brain, if the thirds aren't the perfect being that he's trying to create, then all thirds are technically failures. So yeah,
Yeah. So
then
it's
they say whatever innate flaw that's in the third that you don't know until this point.
yes, we're kind of getting at this point. We're kind of getting that like up until now we thought that the third was the pinnacle, was the end all be all of what robots could be, and we're finding out that Dr. Asakura kind of never meant it to be that way, and he actually was like, "No, well, I was going for something like else, and y'all just thought that this is like where we were ending up." And so it's at this point that Dr. Asakura, having already acted a little bit odd, sort of starts to act really strange and kind of wanders around the room, kind of ranting and raving a little bit. And
He
this
has almost an infant like tantrum at that moment, and then yeah,
and then this is where the helper robot Dan Claude turns to Armitage and Syllabus and goes, "Yeah, Doctor Asakura has lost his mind." But like not in a joke way. He's like basically saying like, "Yeah, Doctor Asakura is not what he was," um, and we're kind of yeah, he's basically crazy now and can't really do good science and produce better and better robots anymore.
well, yeah, it's to the he's suffered like a memory loss or like a memory wipe to a certain extent, which once again, no real information. My guess is at some point they kind of had to silence him in a certain way or like erase certain information, like, hey, you're still have enough, like company viable like research that we can keep you around to make new stuff, but that thing you did, we have to pretend like it didn't happen, so we are going to erase, we're trying to erase the information of what happened. um
Yeah.
and then that's when they find out, and then they kind of in a moment of lucidity, like uh he like Asakura says, like comes in and talks about how this Dan Claude model had been altered. I fixed it, removed the tendencies for like violence, and that's why you realize why this one seems so different, because he's like chill, he's kind of like more of a mellow assistant, like a butler.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but like a butler, kind of a assistant robot, but very even keel and helpful in a lot of ways. So at this point, there's a little bit more talk and questioning, but Syllabus sort of starts to get a little bit angry. And so is Armitage, but Armitage is like, "Don't bother. This is kind of like lost to us." And so the two leave in anger and go outside, and they make a camp as night is falling. Um, and then and then at this point, Armitage, kind of starts to talk, and she gets very sad and laments kind of having human feelings, but not knowing what it's like to actually be human. Um, and Ross tries to console her, and this is where they end up doing it. And yeah.
Yeah, so this whole scene was kind of weird because I'm like, okay, so you think there's some spare rooms in this guy's, they're in a giant dome, and they're like, no, no, we're in this dome, we're in this like greenhouse, essentially, we're just gonna light a fire and camp out here, like let your filtration system like do all the work for us. It's really like you're on whatever air purifying scrubbers you have. Yeah, yeah, just who cares? I'm like, dude, wouldn't they just take a there has to be an empty office, empty room to sleep in.
Well,
It was
my
just really weird.
my interpretation of it is that she just didn't want to be there anymore, because it all had made her mad, and Ross mad as well, and they were just like, just don't want to be here. They just wanted to leave and be gone, be separated from all that stuff. Um, and then also it's sort of a, I don't know. You ever heard the
It
term?
sets the mood.
Yeah, like being in the woods sets the mood. You ever heard the term? You talk of country matters. So country matters. Nelly later in like the year 2000 or so, he wrote a song and called uh, Country Grammar, and it's basically that sort of kind of term. But country matters is a Shakespearean era term that means sex and like doing it. I guess because you see farm animals doing that. That's my guess. Anyway, so I just kind of think
You're the one
like,
from Texas. I'll defer to you on that.
yeah. So I guess that's why they had to go outside in the country to talk of country matters or whatever. Anyway, so they do it, and then that scene kind of ends. Then we switch over to more of a macro scene where the Federation chairwoman Everhart is coming to visit Mars because a new economic agreement has been signed between Earth and Mars. And so it shows her like arriving and like driving, through crowds and like waving at the crowds and stuff like that. And I think this is a point where you told me before that you were pretty sure that she was going to get JFK'd or something like that.
Dude, I was 1000% expecting her. Like, I've always thought the scene was like meant to have an assassination at this
It
point.
does feel like it.
Especially when you have like Dan Claude running about these different like the whole concept of like the strife. It feels like they're supposed to be, because once again, they don't give you enough information about this whole political joint venture. And I forget, there's a slogan. It was something like, they kind of talk about it a little, I think a little bit later, but it's like two planets, one world, or something like that. And then yeah, and then
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think they have one slogan, and then they alter the slogan like mid sentence. Like the guys talk about, this is the old slogan, and now everyone's talking about like two worlds, one humanity. I think is what it was, to help emphasize the hate for machines or
Oh
robots.
yeah. We
And
stand.
they're,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, so it's, once again, I just expected a car bomb, a sniper, or something. It's just like, but that's, I think that is a little bit more later, where she's literally doing a parade procession as she's like waving to the crowd.
Yeah. So then, kind of next morning, uh, Armitage and Ross go back into the lab, and the robot Dan Claude shows um, Ross and Armitage the next upgrade of Armitage in a holding tank. So this one is more it's more like her. It's like human. It's more human like, and it looks like her. But basically explains that this model was never completed because Dr. Asakura had a memory wipe or lost his mind, or however they worded exactly.
It's actually not, it's actually more alien than human.
I thought that was the
Because
first
this one,
one.
the one they show, so what they do is they end up showing her in a tank, and they show like, uh it would be the best way to explain it, something like from Evangelion. It, like, she has these growths coming out that look kind of wooden,
Okay, but
but
what
like
I
almost
mean,
trying to do an
but
angelic thing.
like what I'm talking about is like the one that we saw in a tank in the day before, where Dr. Asakura is like, "This is what I'm working on." It's like the tree people, but but like in a tank, and
Yes.
it's very like flat faced and looks less human. This thing, yeah, it's not human,
Okay.
but it's got like a pretty girl face, and it's got
It's no, it's straight up Armitage's face. It is
yeah,
it is
yeah.
like, it is the next it's Armitage 1.5. It is the next, because it is literally meant to be the next upgrade for her. And so yes, for sure, this is based off of Armitage, the one you saw previously when he was losing his mind and going through his fit. That is the like him genetic, like whatever genetic needs to grow the big the phobians or whatever, because he, during his rant he's like, you'll just probably call them the fourths, so
Oh yeah,
the
he's
alive.
like, yeah, he's like,
um,
you guys shouldn't have them. You guys shouldn't call them the Force. You probably just call them the Force. Should have a better name than that. Yeah, it's yeah. That
yeah,
guy was kind of weird
this
at
one,
that
like I said,
point.
this is showing just the weird prototype, and because it is Armitage's face on this next evolution. It's kind of a, and then explaining how she is flawed, um, and kind of explaining like more of what Dan Claude, and the science behind it or whatever. I can't remember if this is the point where they do the full drop of like the reasoning behind, like, this whole scene kind of explains it, but like Dan Claude and her for the thirds were made for assassination.
Right.
Um, and they show they kind of show silhouettes, I believe, of like uh, male figures walking about, but they also have the female, which makes sense in a feminist society, that you would want to have women, female assassins, mingle, and that's another good reason why you'd have them have high art capability, high society. You can easily go in and out of the situation. So if you have someone who's a famous author, who is a famous musician, they would be able to hit targets that you normally wouldn't be able to hit. Um,
Hmm.
so that's kind of like the other shoe dropping at this point, because up until this point you're like, oh, for making babies, that is their goal, repopulation, this, that, the other thing, and that's why they're all women. Well, it turns out all the women that you found, they are different types, but they are for assassination, while Dan Claude is just like the carbon copy generic murder robot. um
Yeah, not the kind of a
so
blunt instrument, whereas the thirds were made to be more like scalpels. Like we're gonna get high level targets and just be for this one little thing, just one little thing. Whereas the other guys are basically just soldiers.
yeah, and so they kind of explain how that's kind of, they drop once again how the thirds are defective or imperfect, and that one kind of doesn't. Once again, it's still kind of confusing, because the way they explain it, we're like, well, I guess if you're looking at it from the creator's point of view and trying to make the penoptimal like being or something, like, or the optimal being, like, then technically they're not quite there yet. The thirds aren't, so therefore they will always be flawed. But they, other than that, they really don't explain why the thirds are flawed. Just they just constantly are saying you're flawed because we're saying you're flawed. You're not, and then so that's what's hitting Armitage like the hardest during the scene, is because she's like, um, like, my purpose is now moot. Like, I have no real reason, and it's uh, yeah, it's kind of it's not really a coherent scene to kind of grasp.
Yeah, yeah. So at this point, Dan Claude says that Earth wants the thirds destroyed because the ability of the thirds to conceive goes against their narrative or their idea of what it means to be human. Um, and the and what the wiki says, I'm pretty sure that basically the the feminist society of Earth trying in their dealings with Mars, they're like, we'll work with you, but you got to get rid of the thirds. Like you got to get rid of those robots and stuff like that. And so Mars is like, okay, like let's end the strife, let's end the the war or whatever. Work with Earth because they have they're military economically stronger, and so we'll get rid of the robots as well.
Yeah. So once again, to the best of our knowledge, the thirds never were mentioned or revealed to society until McCannon, like until the first time it happened. Now, so this is a thing that, it's like maybe it's a backroom dealing with Conception or the companies. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we're XYZ company, and here's our business plan. Here's the information. We're like on a high level government, funded thing. We have these these robots that we're making for everybody. This is so, and there's X amount out there, because for them to be like, McCannon was a third, and like no one referring to them as a, knowing the truth about them, like it's all seems to be the universe under like was revealed to the thirds when we were as the audience. Um, there's no indication for that they were already aware of the existence, so it's really, like I said, it's just this is where the actual story kind of just falls apart in my opinion.
Yeah, because the first, that their goal seems to have been, to and it should have been to make the most important part of the story be about the main characters that you're really supposed to care about. And they have this idea. There's probably a lot of writing that the creators did on, the backdrop of the society, but you just can't fit all of that into something like this. So they're like, okay, well, where can we fit it in? And they're trying to kind of staple it on there, but it really doesn't. It just can't fit it. And so they do what they can, but it's a little bit ham-fisted, I would say. So yeah.
Yeah, because once again, it's it makes sense if you're like, okay, if everyone knew about the wide existence of this group called the Thirds, but according to the list, all the Thirds is a small group. There's not a lot of them there. Now, if there was secretly like a huge population, and then you're like, all right, we need to exterminate. That's what they're talking about. They're pretty much talking about a genocide of these, higher functioning robots, because for what we've gathered, Thirds are, mentally wise, there might as well be humans, because Julian even says like that's why you have to, like, one of the reasons to have like to be mothers, but you can't just be a mother, you have to, like have a soul, and that's why these artists, like they people who learn about culture and stuff like that, that's what helps with raising a child, is having a soul. You're not just a mindless robot. So I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And the earth having a the feminist government, uh fearing replacement from a machine that can, like, not only, like, outlive them, outperform them, and is better and stronger in every way, but also can have children.
Yeah.
So now organic women are in danger, essentially, because these robots literally can do everything they can. So uh
Yeah.
but once again, it's like, to the best of your knowledge, that list is of Thirds is really short. And so, like, the
Yeah.
ones that have been dying, so like it's, once again, if the Thirds have been around for a long time, and then the surprise was McCannon. Oh, McCannon was one of them. Who would have thought? Like,
Mm.
so you're learning everything as Armitage is learning it, essentially, and she's trying to figure out herself. And they're, the whole, they're flawed and imperfect, and so it's for the Earth to have this concept of like, no, no, we will work with Mars, genocide those things right now, just get rid of all of them. And it's just like
Yeah.
that's what was holding you back up until now, because they've been in discussions for a very long time, one would assume, but we're like,
And
you
it's
know
it's sort of, I mean, like, I guess St. Lowell, the city, is like the biggest city on Mars, I guess is what we can presume. It's very strange that, like, the judiciary guy and the other lady, which maybe there's more than one, I don't know, going on, but them meeting with the lieutenant was like, why are you guys meeting with a lieutenant? Wouldn't you guys meet with, like, the city managers or the mayor or somebody higher up in the government than this guy that's literally. So I mean, there's ways you could kind of make that make a bit more sense, but it's just a bit of a stretch. Um, so anyway, speaking of Lieutenant Randolph, so basically, after Dan Claude's speech, we go back to to Lieutenant Randolph, and he calls and gives Syllabus and Armitage a tip that they will be attacked, but says that he and the police force won't be able to help. So it's like, okay, you guys are gonna be attacked, but you're on your own, And so it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess we gotta get ready to figure this out. So Armitage, at this point, she sees a picture of Asakura and his real life daughter who looks like her, and she threatens him with something. She's kind of like sick of his, like, attitude, and he turns and he finally, like, recognizes her as his daughter, or so it seems, and they go to like hug, and he kind of just uses that moment to tase her and effectively knock her out, and then takes that time while she's knocked out to install upgrades to her chassis. But basically, those upgrades are angel wings and advanced weaponry.
So, yeah, I mean, one thing though I'd like to admit, like, so during the talk with the lieutenant, uh, it's funny because in the movie, that they're just saying, hey, or like I don't even remember. I'm trying to remember to what extent they all talk about, but I do know that in the OVA they specifically use the fact that hey, you're about to be attacked, but also and we can't help you, but because you're terrorists, also charged with the puppet bombs. So they tacked on that little news clippet of the puppet bombs. Like
Oh, okay.
they've added that, so it's like extra fuel to the fire. Once again, it feels like that would be in a longer series. That would be you could show a couple more of those, and then you can have some more discussion about them, and then how Armitage and Ross are just being like labeled as because they technically did do a terrorist act, and they're like, well, they're tied to these terrorist act too. So that's kind of but there is at the end of the message essentially the lieutenant and the entire squad, like they are, precinct is next to them, and they just pretty much give them, their best wishes, so like their support as much as emotionally as they can. So
Yeah,
it's like
like good
you know
luck.
that
Yeah.
yeah, obviously because they told them ahead of time. They were courteous enough to let them know, hey, we're giving you a warning that these guys coming in, but we can't do anything for you, but we it's like Godspeed essentially. So
Yeah. So,
um, yeah, and
so
then you do see some impending images of soldiers or robots coming at them, to intercept
So yeah, there is
during
an
and also
army that does start to come and attack, and they um, and it just kind of shows like soldiers and stuff. And so this attack comes, but Armitage is able to destroy the entire force with the help of Ross in a mech suit for real this time. Um, and it's pretty cool. Like they do a lot of like flying around and missiles, and her like in like this like angel wings like flying around like blowing things up and stuff. So that part is pretty cool, and they are able to just kind of level like all of them. Um, yeah.
so when Asakura does tase Armitage though, he also I think he says some line of something akin to like, now I can make you whole or complete, because you know and that's then of course you see her as all kitted out, um
So basically, he
and
was like saying like the upgrades that are in that tank over there. That's sort of what I want to do to you now.
that's what I was led to believe.
Okay,
The upgrades don't quite look one to one. I mean, and like I
but
said, the
it's
wings that
something.
she gets are something like kind of like a fairy, or like they're almost like insect like because they're kind of like wafty but transparent, opposed to like a feathered wing or something like that. Um, and then she has the two shoulder mounted lasers that just completely cut through everything. That whole scene is really good, and I do know that in the movie the the music playing in this scene is like it's much softer tone, and it's a good juxtaposition for the action going on screen. It's like a little bit it's somber, foreboding. You end up seeing, and at the time you're also looking at the fact that because up until that point Armitage was trying to get uh her father out essentially. That's what she was like, she even tried ordering him as a police officer, um because they were going to get attacked. And before the battle starts, Ross and Armitage leave, and the military send in a missile to take out the compound.
Mm.
And Asakura's like, no, that I'm going to die with my creations. These are my babies. I'm staying there to the end. And of course, the lobotomized Dan Claude is like, nope, I'm staying here too because this is my function. You know, to the end.
Because I've been
Uh,
reprogrammed to
so
just
yeah,
do
I
this
mean,
stuff. I guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
But no, like I said, the whole final battle scenes, it's pretty good. As you see Armitage slowly taking damage, losing a wing, losing one of the laser cannons. Uh, and it's just it's flashy enough, but without being too over the top. And towards the at the end of this, it kind of it's an interesting. I feel like they try to throw you for a quick fake because of that scene, the entire emotional context of everything going on at this point, uh, being slow music, them slowly getting whittled down, taking damage. Ross takes his eyes off of the battlefield for a second to look at Armitage as she takes some damage. Then he gets injured himself, his mech, and it's just like you're this is like the Bonnie and Clyde moment essentially. You're it's kind of building up for it.
Mm.
These two fugitives on the run against all odds. Will they make it? Won't they make? Like what's going to happen?
Sort of
And they're
like
still showing
kind of like
the
Butch
representative.
Cassidy and the Sundance Kid going out in a blaze of glory, but not actually going out, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's led to it's kind of hard to tell at this point. You still have that representative going down the streets in their parade, and then you're showing the a bunch of flashing images on screen, so you can't tell if it's the news feed or if it's supposed to be what's exactly happening because you're seeing the battlefield because there's a bunch of cameras that are flying around there. You're seeing the parade, and the flashing images is almost giving the seconds like an epileptic fit. It's
Mm.
almost like they're being like system hacked, because it's like they are watching something and at their core understand like triggering something that they didn't realize or something because they're showing a bunch of them just standing there staring at the screen, whether it be one walking through a crowded city area with her male companion and just stops dead in the tracks to look at the screen, a waitress just looking at the screen, then even showing doing maintenance on it, a caretaker in front of with little babies, and I'm like, oh man, I hope those kids don't need real help because they're dead now. Um, but yeah, they're all being affected while watching this, which is unique. Which it's kind of like this battle or what's going on. They know that it's supposed to be something more than words can explain because it's literally affecting the seconds in this way. Um, but yeah, and at the very end of it, they show uh, time lapse because it's now nighttime, and they're looking over the city. Uh, Probably down the road from where Julian was buried because it's like a same overcliff looking shot.
Mm, yeah.
Uh, but Armitage is completely like being princess carried, but like unconscious as Ross is monologuing to her kind of a little bit, talking about like the future and some other things, and it's kind of hard to tell what's going on because like, did she just die? You're like, like they couldn't have killed her, right? They did. You're just kind of waiting there, and then she kind of pops up, and you're like, okay, she's alive. All right,
She's
you know.
alive. She's alive. Yeah, so this is what I don't really understand because the battle kind of ends, and then several months later, Ross returns to Mars and meets with Armitage. And I just don't know what happened between the end of the battle and Ross coming back to Mars. And I think I looked at the Wikipedia and I don't think I don't think there was a particularly an answer for it there. Um, so anyway, uh, I guess
Uh,
I'll just go ahead and finish this out. So he returns to Mars and meets with Armitage, and they drive away as he picks her up. And Armitage tells Ross that she's pregnant, and it's sort of kind of pans away, and it's like okay, things are going to be okay, and they're going to like live on, and that's the end.
yeah. Yeah. So the scene, so that this whole essentially the end of the battle, the nightfall. That's where the movie ends. Polymatrix that ends at that spot where they kind of talk loosely in while holding each other post battle, and then it cuts away to the end of episode one, Electro Blood, where it's showing the McCannon photo on the ground as the bypassers are walking by, and then it eventually gets crumpled under people's walking, and then they just kind of move on, which for the film kind of makes it look great because it's like it
Okay.
closes. It's just this is the end of another story. It's just like, okay, this news thing is gone, this too will pass, just a new chapter. People just life moves on, and it's just kind of like we will forget about what happened and they are going to try to make do with what they got. um you now in the OVA, um I don't remember too much. Like, so this scene is it's like he comes back, and one of the scenes is I think it's Armitage is standing in the airport in front of the picture, the painting, but a very big version of it, of what the third artist had created. I can't remember her name now, but her lover was painted
Jessica,
as like an
right?
angel.
Yes.
Jessica, yeah, but it's Jessica's painting kind of as but blown up extremely big, and Armitage has supports a new hairstyle, uh, which is just shorter than it was before, but
Mm,
that's and more or less the what you're led to believe is Ross went back to Earth, and he has new credentials. He has a new human ID
right.
is what and then Armitage being as flippant as ever, she just like tosses it because I believe she just doesn't want to go to Earth. Like she just wants to live as who she is,
Yeah.
live, be herself. Um, and that's when they kind of drop the bomb that she's pregnant now, and it's a it's kind of nice because you're like, oh, they get more of a happy ending instead of just the ambiguous, like, okay, well, now they're literally on the run from like they just finished the battle scene, and then you're just led to believe that the the forces that literally went to kill them just gave up. They're like, oh dang, we lost that battle. We will now give up the war. Like it's they
Y-
just kind of end it there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it does just kind of end where they are more or less on the run or free to live the way that they want. Um, and it's sort of okay because they didn't really, you know, go whole hog into all the politics. They kind of just use it as a way to have kind of have a final battle. And so it's sort of just left as a halfway decent ending is kind of the way that I take it.
Yeah, it's once again the final battle is like you have to have it end on a high note or some
Right.
sort of big epic thing, and um, it's one of those the because of the politics being uh not so heavy up front. Like I said, it's just you kind of have to read into it, and that's why it's like, or I'm not sure where half the wiki page got their information from. Once again, the back of the DVD box for the movie tells you more. It tells you more about the background of settling Mars and a lot of other stuff. So
Yeah.
who knows what to believe essentially. But when it comes to the final scene, it's a cool scene. It's done very well. The music is very, like I said, I really thought it was a strong scene as a on itself, and it's well done when you compare it to I don't know what it could have been. It could have been loud, harsh, and fast, but they took a very different approach for it. And I really do like the way the movie ends, just because once again having that you know just kind of like it just kind of crumbles, and it's like, yeah, people will forget about it, just we move on as a society.
Yeah.
And it's just with you're kind of also kind of left to that to a certain extent with the OVA ending, where like, well, they now have a new, like, obviously Ross has connections, and he's able to have he's able to travel to Earth and back. He's technically a wanted terrorist, but he was able to leave planet. So like I said, that brings me more problems than
Yeah.
just having it end the way the movie did. Um, but they are going to kind of live on the lam, you keep it, keep a low profile, and now have a family. Which the whole idea of her being pregnant now gives you new hope. Um, spoiler: they have kids in the sequel film,
Hmm.
or the sequel series, which
Dual
is Dual
Matrix.
Matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which came out several years
Uh,
later, and we will probably be doing that at some point in the future as well. Um, so so yeah, there's a couple there's a couple things that I wanted to kind of bring up. One thing that I read from the Wikipedia that the creator said is that a lot of this story is inspired by the Dunwich horror by H.P. Lovecraft, and I read the synopsis of that story, and Dr. Asakura, um, I feel like so basically there are some names that are used. I forget which one is used.
Armitage is legit a name in that.
I think yeah, I think it is that.
Or at least in a different Lovecraft thing. I know
It's
Armitage is a Lovecraftian name in there.
I think it is like the I think it's Doctor Armitage or something like that. I have it pulled up somewhere here, but basically, um, yeah, so it must be Henry Armitage is the head librarian at the university, and so that's a big part of kind of why that name was chosen, I guess. But reading through the synopsis of that story, you can sort of see some of the similarities. It is different because that is more like, oh, this monster was created and we have to like fight and kill this monster, and it's like actually bad, and so you can see a lot of similarities there. But in Armitage III, it's kind of flipped the other way. Like, what if the monster wasn't really the problem here? You know, so I found that to be pretty interesting. Um, and then just like final thoughts on OVA and Polymatrix. Uh, Personally, I prefer the OVA quite a bit more. I do think that Polymatrix is more cohesive, and it kind of answers its own questions a lot better. The problem I have with Polymatrix is that it is extremely hard to follow because of how quick it shows you everything, and it's one of those things where it's like watching it the first time I was like, man, this is just it's so fast paced. It's like ding 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 ding, and it's like showing you all these things, and I'm just like, I don't really understand what's going on, and I am also kind of in a place where I just don't really care. Whereas the OVA, yeah, it asks questions that it can't answer, and it does things that kind of like leaves loops open and stuff like that. But as far as like the pacing and the feel of it goes, I definitely had a lot more go like, oh, okay, because I watched Polymatrix first a while ago, came back and watched the OVA, and there's a lot of things in the OVA that I was watching. I was like, wait, that wasn't it. That was not in Polymatrix. Oh, that's what they were going for. Oh, okay. So like just between those two, that is sort of the style of it that I prefer. But I will say that like, yeah, as a like continuity from a continuity standpoint, Polymatrix does seem to stand out better.
Yeah, I do. I prefer a lot of the voice acting, the recording of Polymatrix. I think the fact that it's a tight 90, like, really is impressive, and but it also kind of, to a certain extent, is a hindrance because you don't get to flush out a lot of scenes. But in reality, a lot of those scenes aren't really flushed out anyways.
Yeah, there's not really. Yeah.
So that's the caveat. It's like you're losing, like, you lose all the scenes with the conception company, PR guy. And you're like, well, by the end of the day, it really wasn't necessary. Um, there's only a handful of scenes that I think is kind of a little bit more. It adds a little more into it, like to show a few extra thirds being murdered, and then you getting around to, because you have more dealings with the conception company. You're like, okay, well, they're handling the autopsy for all these thirds so far, and then they finally have the uh, I forgot, the dancer, who's killed and tied to the elevator,
Hmm.
and then she's the one that you find out is pregnant, which is neat. And they kind of even hint at it because she knows she's pregnant, because she kind of tries to say, like, please don't kill me. And she kind of hints, and you see her look at her stomach, and then she's dead. Um, but by having McKinnon be pregnant, it's neat because it really affects how the manager, like, to think back on how the manager reacted, and how it's
Oh,
so
so like they
shocking.
were
It's so
like in
much
love.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like when he says, "I knew her. There's no way. Like she could be. Like, there's no way she's a robot. I knew her better than anyone else."
He
And
also
now you
says something
realize that
like,
she's
"She's the most human woman I know," which is sort of a weird thing to
yeah,
say, but yeah.
yeah. So it's which funny enough, um, that is voiced by Stephen Blum, the voice of Spike and like
Oh,
Wolverine. Yeah, so Spike from Cowboy Bebop, Wolverine from a lot of the X-Men anime.
because I thought
So
that
it's
was
just like, wow.
I thought Spike was his first role, but maybe it's his first starring role, um, or something like that.
Probably the case. I
Weird.
actually don't
Okay.
know his page. I just know he's been in voices forever.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, since then for sure.
and but yeah, I mean, so that's and I believe he's credited for the manager in both the just for both the OVA and the film.
Yeah.
So like the film only replaced a handful of people. Like I believe the film replaced the lieutenant and of course Armitage and Ross.
Well, it's weird too
Um,
because like the lieutenant is so the film has one guy as the lieutenant, and that same guy is also, let's see, here it is, yeah. So in the OVA, it's like the information I found said Edward Mannix and Mike Reynolds played the voice of the lieutenant, but in Polymatrix, it has just Mike Reynolds. So maybe they maybe they used both of them in different scenes for the OVA, but then whenever it went to the Polymatrix, it's like, we're only going to end up using Mike Reynolds scenes or something like that. I don't know, but anyway, I thought that was kind of weird, and maybe I just have wrong information because it's from something else.
yeah, the so personally, like I said, I grew up with
Polymatrix.
Polymatrix. I watched that a lot. Um, having bootlegged it, VHS to VHS copy. So
Yeah.
uh and it was like I said, being so young, you end up just watching, it's like the handful of, especially back then, the handful of anime you have. It's just like, I had seen it so often. Certain soundtrack scores to that is just ingrained into my brain. The Overall, it does make a little more cohesive sense doing the OVA, but once again, I just feel that in all said and done, um, if you have the time for it, sure, the OVA is the way to go, I guess. But
I,
at the same time, once again, it doesn't add enough to it that really warrants it, and then the production value or the way it's cut from to the Polymatrix is the reason why I personally go with it. Now,
like honestly,
you know,
I'm looking at this, the scenes that are not in the movie, the scenes that are not in the OVA. This seems like something that would benefit from a bootleg like Ultra Matrix fan edit, where because there's at least a few scenes from Polymatrix that could easily be in the OVA. It wouldn't break any like continuity. And I don't know about everything, but there's at least a few. And I would like a version of this. It's like you you get a Blu-ray or whatever, and it's got the OVA, it's got Polymatrix, and it's got a complete cut where it's like we give you basically the opening like an episode, and it just plays all the way through, and then we have the ending like an ending episode. And I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could cut that because it's like, well, if you like Polymatrix more, then it's whatever. But I just feel like you could fit everything in if you just do the OVA, the OVA format, and then you add in those scenes, then I think it could probably work. Like it would just be everything, which you know I don't know. It still
see,
wouldn't be
for
enough
me,
to really fill it out.
the scenes that I particularly like from the OVA are ones that actually like are completely just extra filler. They're so minor, but it just adds something to it. So, for example, the scenes right after they get out from the airport, and right when they arrive at the police precinct.
Hmm.
Um, Ross gets out of the vehicle and the news swarms him talking about McCannon's death. And then essentially he's just dealing with all these reporters, looks over at Armitage. Armitage is like, "See ya," and like goes to park the car, tints the windows, and
Yeah.
drives away. And it's just a very funny little interaction. Um, but it's like it's just a little flavor there. Or when Ross the first night he's at his apartment, and later on again when he's resting at his apartment, they show like when you're first there, you see the window, and it's just like, oh, it shows the cityscape. That's pretty neat.
Mhm.
And then but when when he had like the first night he's there, he has a scenic background.
Mhm.
It's just, like, and then later on he has like a castle in the
Mhm.
background. It's just like some lake
A
and castle, like,
and
yeah,
that
and it's kind of it literally digitally like freezes for a second. It has like a freak out. Yeah, as a bird flies by and stuff.
yeah, and
And I just think
that's kind of the
that's
thing with like Polymatrix. I imagine growing up, you watch this over and over and over again, and when you are able to do that, you catch things that you didn't catch the first time, second time, or the 10th time through, and it has you are able to slow it down because just in your mind because you've just kind of mapped out every single pixel on every single frame. um, and that's sort of the thing that I liked about the OVA more is with Polymatrix, I just kept going like, where the hell am I? Like, what the hell is going on here? And the OVA has like those little filler scenes, but they help to fill out, they help to show you, okay, this is where you are. This is the feel that we're going for here, dog. And what, how like where to like orient yourself in, the sci-fi like mind space. So yeah, it kind of goes back and forth as to whether or not if you got 90 minutes, then yeah, heck yeah, just go straight for Polymatrix. If you have a little bit more time, then honestly, you know where to start. I don't know. I would probably just say go with Polymatrix, and that way your time is probably respected the most. If you are an anime deep diver, then I would say go with the OVA first and then watch Polymatrix. But really, it's up to you.
Yeah, I think there's not enough added to the transitional scene. Some of them are, but it's just it's like I said, it's slow and un uneventful.
Mm-hmm.
With some of the early conception stuff, you're just walking in and seeing things. So it's like some of the stuff that hard edits that still don't make any sense in both versions. Like, just why is Armitage on this counter yelling at this robot, threatening to beat it up? Like, that's still a rough transition in itself. Like, so certain things don't have an explanation. The only other thing is like just one or two major scenes have a little bit more to them, like the church interaction when Ross fights Dan Claude.
Yeah.
It's like there's just a little bit more there up until they get to the top, and then the way Armitage is introduced before she incapacitates. But then they also do some things that don't make it as much sense because like I said, the rule of cool applies,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just like they make her super fast, like so fast that she's just a blur a couple times in the OVA, and then she has this little monologue, and then she takes out Dan Claude, but then has you know both end with her jumping off the building, but then they happen to add an extra scene with she needs rescuing in the river, and I'm like, that scene actually takes away from the character in some respect, and or like her looking for the writer in the alley. That scene, I'm like, I feel like those scenes don't really add much to it in the end. Though I will say, I mentioned when we are talking about that scene, how she looks manic, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's almost elated to fight because part of it's her being hot headed, but now that you realize that all said and done, she's designed as an assassin, so
Mm-hmm.
you kind of understand that to a certain extent. You're like, oh, okay, so kind of murder and violence is kind of in her DNA, as it were. Um, so
And that's
her
like the
causing
Dunwich
damage.
horror aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that makes a little bit more sense, in retrospect, uh, but at the same time, it's, like I said, I think, due to the polish and more or less you're not losing a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things you're not losing enough, I prefer Polymatrix, but then what I would say, if you like that enough and you just want to if you want to see it again, if you're going to do a second pass, and then if you're out of curiosity and you have the time, yeah, sure. The episodes, the OVA is the way to go then, to get a little bit more, just to see what you're missing.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, it's 4
There's,
episodes. It's
yeah.
technically, I would say it's 5 because the first one is a double. So
Mm.
it's,
Yeah,
uh,
it's like, probably averaging out less than 20 minutes if you do it to 5 episodes, but yeah, it's that first episode is very long. Um, yeah, I think that there's a lot here though. I think that the two ways that I would go with it are with the OVA to expand it out to a full season of anime, and probably not even just 12 episodes. Though I think you could probably do pretty good job with 12 episodes. I think this would be it would still involve some rewrites, but like a 24 episode full ass season of anime would you could there's enough here, like there's enough here. You'd have to make more, but there's enough of a core here to go, okay, here's these characters, here's some extra things that they do, because there's a lot of things that are episode starts within each episode, like when the woman is killed and left on the elevator, to be found. That's clearly like a start of an episode. The writer being murdered, like that's the start of an episode. There's just a lot of different things that are kind of sticking out here. So I'm like, that would be one way that I would have, with infinite money and time and all that stuff, one way I would have liked to go with it. The other way with the movie would be substantial rewrites of the OVA to create more continuity, and a lot more redraw and reanimation, and really bump up some of the rougher areas of the animation and stuff like that to kind of bring it into like full feature film kind of quality. And 90 minutes is probably enough for you to tell some version of the story, but like bumping it up to maybe like a buck 45, probably not 2 hours, because 2 hours of animation can actually feel very long, but probably like a buck 45, so it feels nice and long and filled out, but there just wasn't really enough demand for that, it seems. But that's kind of what I would have liked to have seen.
You're also talking about the time though. That when this was created, not
Oh
everything
yeah.
was 90 minutes. So that's the thing is, I honestly think a 2 hour cut of this would be like the amount of time you need. One of the reasons why I like this, I find Polymatrix. So one of the things is compared to obviously a lot, especially at the time, is Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell. Um, I'll, one of the things is it's about the same runtime. It might be even just a little less. I think it's like an hour and 20 something, 25 maybe.
Hmm.
So just a hair less than Armitage. Uh, but it has a more or less simple story. Um, but it's a little unfair to pull, because you're
Well,
talking about a manga that had been around, like a
yes,
decade prior.
and
Um,
and
but they
just
have a lot of establishing. Yeah, go on.
well, just to jump in there, so yeah, Ghost in the Shell manga that had been around a long time, and also the Ghost in the Shell movie is not about the beginning of the manga. It is a cut from, I forget exactly how deep into it was, but it's from a particular cut out of the middle of the manga on one particular arc. So it had years and years and years of all this stuff. And finally, after all this time, they were like, man, this thing's really popular. Hey, there's this one section that we can look at, and we can put it's already ready to go. We can make a 90-minute movie and make it super cool, and it all fits together pretty well. So they kind of had their pick of the litter on that, whereas Armitage is like soup to nuts from conception to making it, that's a lot harder to do.
Yes, and I think with Ghost in the Shell, it's a much slower movie. In the grand scheme, you have a cool opener, but then there are a lot of scenes in the beginning where it's just a whole lot of nothing. I mean, it's establishing people, characters, but or just also let's just watch another plane fall, like land, and
Mm,
let's watch it's a city shots and which are beautiful. But at the same time, it's a very different kind of film. I mean, the idea of spending as much time the time you spend was just watching her scuba dive. It's a
yeah.
small bit. Um, it very much talks about a very important concept, fears and mental, like limitations, but at the same time, uh,
And that's a movie
compared
that's
to
probably
an action scene,
yeah, that's a movie that's
yeah.
probably trying to take a story that's maybe a bit too small and fill it out to 90 minutes. Whereas Armitage is a story that's really too big and trying to fit it into even the OVA, but especially Polymatrix.
So yes, exactly, and I think the other than doing a 2 hour cut of the movie, or like also once again, you're talking about Ghost in the Shell having obviously a massive budget in comparison because Armitage was put out as an OVA. OVAs don't have the biggest budget, and then they just did a theatrical cut,
Yeah.
edit and then they put most it's like so the work was already done. They only had to literally, as we talked about, make like a few extra scenes, like 3 to 5 at most, for the film,
Hmm.
and then they put their money in, or at least for the US portion, getting the voice acting there. To get some big names to pull some attention, but it didn't even like really get a theatrical release in the States, not at least what we would consider anime to get a theatrical release now, because anime, once again,
I mean,
if
the
this was Japanimation back then, no one cared. If it's like not even like there's so few major films, like things that got attention. Totoro was not even done by like wasn't backed by Pixar slash Disney back then. It was done by Fox, I think. Totoro and Kiki.
yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, it's just a very different landscape for anime at that time.
Hmm.
While so
But
it's
but
it's
like
not fair to compare, but they
so
are still within the same wheelhouse.
yeah, I mean they're released in the same year. They're similar, cyberpunkian kind of ideas. The fact that they got Kiefer Sutherland and Elizabeth Berkley in this pretty is pretty amazing. I know they weren't quite the superstars that that they might have been later or were earlier or whatever, but still those are pretty big gets, and a lot of the a lot of the lower or a lot of the lower level talent, a lot of the non-star talent too, was people that had been around or would go on to be around and be very talented and stay in the industry for a very long time. I do think that there's a lot of really good stuff in Armitage. Like there's a lot of really good ideas. There's a lot of really good concepts. I think some of them are a little bit um, they're not really handled properly because of the kind of smash and grab feel of the animation. But there is something really good and strong there, and it would have been really cool to see this expanded out into something much larger. I think.
Yeah, and I guess if I had to have my like like best case scenario, but within realm of reason, like because I honestly don't think a 24 episode series would be I I don't necessarily think I would like that, or and I sure as heck don't want it to be a procedural, like or like here's another episode, another dead body to investigate, to do their backgrounds on. I think maybe something like how they did Pluto, um, the Astro Boy, Netflix
Mm,
joint show, because with the that one had the art from the creator who did Monster, and but those were like it was like 8 episodes, roughly an hour a piece, somewhere a little longer, I think, like, but somewhere just a little shorter. But yeah, like that was kind of shorter and more concise, and like you were able to in each episode get enough done.
mm,
And I think that would be maybe even that would be just a little too long. And it's like maybe do it to us, 6 hours it would be because you would
Well,
be able to really flush out, the different dynamics, the different
yeah,
politics.
I was kind of
Um,
talking about like what could have been done like in 1997, 1998, like looking back on the OVA and going, okay, how do we proceed from here? And at that time period, in today, yeah, I think you're right. I think in this day and age, I think you go back in and you look at what Armitage is, and then you do a rewrite, and see what it fits into. And it's like, well, we got a 12 episodes of a week. We have a clean 12 episodes of a half whatever single season of anime. We can just do that. Or yeah, if they do end up with something a little bit, something interstitial, where it's like, well, we don't have 12 episodes. We don't, but we have less than that. We have like 8, or we have like this thing or that thing. Whatever you end up with, that's kind of the beauty of this day and age, is whatever you end up with, there's somewhere that you can put it out that it fits. And it's like, well, how about 6 episodes, like 6 single hour long episodes on Netflix? And that would be that, if it was like good enough, then that would be a big event if it's like fit properly. So that would be pretty cool. Yeah.
the other thing I generally really like about Armitage as a whole is the art style. I mean, the lack of, especially nowadays where we have such a crutch for CG. I mean, now Ghost in the Shell does things beautifully, but at the same time, the color palette of Ghost in the Shell sometimes can be, looking in hindsight, like it's the charm of it what it is, but like when you're looking at their faces, there's not enough, they're meant to be more cold and bland.
Mm-hmm.
um and that's just the way it's meant to be designed. I mean, um I prefer, when it comes to uh the other works by the same creator, um I like the like Dominion Tank Police, which is an 80s anime, like, but same artist, and it has a really unique flair. I find that the film, uh there is something about it that like I don't quite like as much. Um and that's why I do like the actual, like, drawing, the way the characters are drawn, the way, you get more flair for the background. And so it's one of those unique things where if you were to redo Armitage, I feel like it would be like when how they every time they try to redo Ghost in the Shell, like they tried redoing
Oh,
the
they would
movie in
screw it
CG.
up.
They tried making
Oh
it.
yeah. Yeah.
They tried no, they've tried remaking the same first movie multiple times, and every time after the original, everything is just failing in comparison, and that's why it's just like there is no way to remake it unless if you happen to be a fan, like, and
Well,
even if, like,
the
you
th-
won the lotto and tried making it yourself, it
the,
still
the
you
the
would
the
lose.
the
You would just
problem
lose.
with Ghost in the Shell is they're trying to trick you. They're trying to get you in because you loved that old thing, and they're like, this old thing that you loved, we're gonna make that, and you're gonna go re-experience that. And it's like, yeah, but when you do that, it's just not as good. Whereas whereas with Armitage, a lot of people just don't know about this anime. So to me, as a producer, or whatever rights holder there is over Armitage right now, I'm looking through the archives and I'm going, dang, this had some good ideas. So we can take it, save some money on idea creation, and we can make something really cool like out of it that nobody really knows or remembers. And we can say, oh, classic anime that you've never seen. Something like that maybe, but it's not like it would be them kind of taking it on their own rather than going, how can we trick people into spending some more money on Ghost in the Shell? I just see them as kind
Yeah.
of different things.
Well, I mean, yeah, Ghost in the Shell did granted, the standalone complex series is absolutely amazing,
Hmm.
and that they did really well. Just every time they try to remake the original movie, because despite me, what negative things I've said about the movie thus far, it's still a great
Oh,
movie.
it's classic, yeah.
But when I first watched it, I'm like, I loved it for the things that we're doing, like the whole, the cyberpunk aesthetic. Like these are some of the first cyberpunk. things I consumed as at that age, you know, because you were talking about like probably 96, 97 is probably when I first saw them. I
Mhm.
mean, very few things that I was aware of at the time that I had seen that had any type of this either cyberpunk or dystopian look, because at this time I probably didn't see Blade Runner actually. I would have probably been too young for that as well, but I saw, like, I did see Akira before that. um and that, you know, it's like, so the I maybe I'm trying Strange Days, the film, which is um has what's his name, Voldemort in it. I can't
Ralph
remember his name
Fiennes.
now.
Is it?
And
Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't remember. Yeah, I think you're right. But anyways, that's more of a low key, like, near future cyberpunk, you know, world, because it was like 1999, but we were able to memory jack from each other, like record into disc. You know, I
Mhm.
think Johnny Mnemonic was the only other thing really that I've seen.
Yeah.
Uh,
Johnny Mnemonic.
and
Wow.
so like so seeing Ghost in the Shell was like, oh dude, this is cool as hell. The whole idea of being able to swap, you know, mindsets, and while it's very different with Armitage, because it's, you know, the whole question of like, what does it mean to be alive, or, you know, be human?
Mhm.
You know, what constitute a soul? Because, you know, like I said, like, other anime have talked about that as well, and so it's very different core themes and core, like, the like what's running it. And so uh Ghost in the Shell is still great and it's on its own, but Armitage felt more cyberpunk to me, and as far as uh not being, you know, it's like a different type of cyberpunk, because from the city layout, the fact that you're on Mars, the fact that the way everything's sprawling, the fact that a machine is trying to be human, like, and a man slowly becoming more machine, you know,
Mhm.
like, all that stuff was a great concept. I mean, they kind of talk about that a little bit in Ghost of the Shell, because they have someone who's pretty much not augmented or altered at all, you know, as well in that series, and they have them on the Force solely as a juxtaposition, being like, we need someone who sees things differently than we do, because it keeps us fresh. Because if everyone was the same, then, like, you
It'd be a
know,
weakness.
uh yeah, it's was it it's like the complacency breeds failure, you know,
Mm.
something along those lines. So if everyone can think the same way and we all act the same way, then we can't see our own personal flaws. I'm like, that's a neat concept. So but yeah, anyways, one of my core, you know, anime that I grew up watching was Armitage here. I believe that, you know, I highly recommend it, only because of the fact that it's I think it's just underappreciated. So many people, by the time, you know, if it came out nowadays and age, once again, I wanted you. The reason why I wanted to see you, this is one of uh, my favorites, but at the same time, to see it from fresh eyes. You know, had I watched this now, a thing like this now, with the editing, with the issues, you know, but it was, if it came out in, you know, 2025 era, you know, it's like, a, it'd probably be CG to crap. um and I think I would rip it apart. I would be very dismissive of it, being because, but at the same time, it'd be like, this is just another low key attempt at cyberpunk or sci-fi, you know, because there's so much other media out there
I mean,
since then.
like this coming out, like basically this coming out now, in some ways, even CG to like all hell wouldn't be it wouldn't be as okay, it wouldn't be as bad as it is. But that would actually make it worse because it would feel so generic. Whereas what is here is, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's really rough around the edges, but because of the time period that it was made in, um, and the hand drawn animation, even though it's kind of janky at points, and it's clearly not filled out, and it needs another pass on some, like on some sections, that I could definitely point out. Um, it still has a lot. It still has a lot more charm than like anything, than like your, you know, the second or third from the bottom anime this season. You know, it still has It still has, or even from the top, honestly, it still has a lot more charm than like a lot of those things because of the era that it was made in, and because I mean, I don't know, like it feels like something that you wouldn't really get anymore. And if it came out today, it wouldn't feel anything like what it does. It would be like, well, we got to do it this way, and we got to do it that way, and it would probably just be basically what's the term? It would be you know, like, gosh dang it, what is it called? Where they have rooms of people that that they ask questions to.
Workshopped, think tanked.
It's no, it's close to that. It's really close to that. I'll think of it later. But dang it, I can't think of it. But basically, people like they'd be like, "Well, it's got to be this way, it's got to be that way," and it would come out, and it would just be very bland, and you go, "This sucks," and you just go on with it. You just go on, and you wouldn't even think about it ever again. But because of the way that it is right now, it does have a lot more charm to it, I think. Um,
Yeah. So once again, because I am
that's it. Focus
unequivocally
grouped.
biased.
It would have been focus
Okay.
grouped to death. Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, like I said, because I'm unequivocally biased about this personally, I end up giving this like a solid 8 out of, like 8 out of 10. With my nostalgia kicked in and me knowing the soundtrack and all that stuff and hitting the right notes, I probably end up giving it a 9, only because of being so ingrained into my childhood. But like honestly, I'd probably give it a solid 8. For the average person, I'd probably like, no, if you're just off the streets, you have anime under your belt, you have a whole list of um you've grown up watching film or watching anything. I'm like, all right, for them, the layman or the average person, I'd say 7, 7.5. It's just like that's kind of where I sit at. I'm like, yeah, it's probably a solid C, like 7.5 for most people. um like I said, but for me, it's like I end up giving it a completely different score just because of who I am, and that's but I realize this is me being, it's like I'm trying to introduce you to the things like the old school things that I grew up with and kind of concept. So hopefully we do more of these in the future because it's just like between this and we've done RoboCop in the past and just other, I what I grew up with is a very strange childhood. Like I
Yeah.
said, watching Akira before watching, like I think, like as a elementary school kid,
Yeah.
maybe something I shouldn't have watched. Maybe I shouldn't have been watching RoboCop. It's like I should have been like most people watching Back to the Future instead of RoboCop. So
Yeah, you definitely
uh,
had a little bit of a different path than some other people, but I mean that's what makes it unique, and that's what makes you know that's what just sort of informs uh, your unique taste and stuff like that. And really, it's better in some ways, I think. Yeah, it's uh, it's a it's rare that you get to go in and look at things that were not like the number one hit or the all time, greats of like the era that they came out in. Like people talk about like Evangelion. You watch some Evangelion stuff and you're like, oh, I mean, people sing its praises, but there's some stuff that is very rough around the edges in in that show. Um, and
I had a friend who just finished it for the first time, an adult, and they're like, "So what happened?" I'm like, "Okay, did you watch the end of Evangelion? Did you watch Rebirth or whatever, or like no Death, Death and Rebirth?" And he's like, "What?" He's like, "No, I haven't gotten to that yet." I'm like, he's like, "So." And I'm sitting there giving him a rundown, like a half hour, like we're just drinking. And I'm like, he's like, where are you getting this information? Is it there? Did I just miss it? Because I'm super confused. And I'm like,
you
so
have to earn this. You have to go, what the hell happened? Or you had to be around in 1995 or at 96 or wherever or whenever they finally did End of Evangelion.
yeah, so and then you'd read the articles later because one of the first new types that came out to US when they printed that in the early 2000s was had a full article, discussing it. So anyways, that's the thing is there's a lot of flaws to the things that we love or that made us.
Yeah.
Nothing is perfect, but once again, it's like so many film critique and people who like certain genres. You're like, of course, like you like sci-fi, you like cyberpunk. Then as someone who tries to be who wants to talk film or something like, of course, Blade Runner has to be your top number one, right? And I'm like, Fifth Element. Fifth Element's probably like
Mm,
everyone loves the Fifth Element, but no one will really say off the top that that's probably their favorite one. But once again, it's like when it comes to something like Armitage, for me, it's like junk food. It's like the reliable junk food that you can always come back if it's on TV. Like out, like the thing, like oh, if Forrest Gump's on TV, I'll watch Forrest Gump. I'll let it play, and like
yeah.
it's kind of that way with Armitage. Armitage is like, dude, I know that so well. It's so there with me that that's kind of my go to as far as like, hey, if it was, but the thing is, it's not streaming anywhere, next to nothing, and it's because it's so unknown. But it's as solid as any of that, right? So it's like, I feel that it's, granted, yes, it could have been done better, but it is done well enough, and it does things different enough. So that's where I stand.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty good. And I think that's where we're going to leave it. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Joe's mind. And um, well, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Yeah. Until then, take it easy, guys.